The colony was alive with the usual noises of traders, farmers, and workers going about their daily tasks. The sun hung low in the copper-colored sky, and dust drifted through the air whenever wagons rolled past the gates. People paused for a moment when a strange sound rippled through the valley. A heavy thump of clawed feet and the scrape of scales against stone. Their eyes widened, for it was not often that a dragon entered the colony, let alone one carrying a rider with banners stitched in royal colors. Lysara sat proudly in the saddle, her back straight, her chin lifted higher than the spires of the colony towers. She was young, no more than 20, yet her presence drew whispers. Her long braids were woven with silver threads, and her armor shone like a mirror. She was a dragon rider from a noble house, and she made certain everyone knew it. The air of superiority around her was thick, as though she believed the ground itself should be grateful she had chosen to walk upon it. Beneath her rested Kael'th, her dragon, once feared for his firestorms and graceful dives across battlefields, but now his wings carried the scars of injury. His left wing in particular was folded awkwardly against his side. Bound in straps of steel and leather, the once glorious creature moved with a limp, each step heavy, dragging the shame of his wound behind him. His eyes still glowed bright as embers, but there was pain in them, a frustration that even the great dragon could not hide. As the villagers watched, Lysara tightened her grip on the reins and surveyed the colony, as if it were beneath her notice. To her, this place was nothing more than a pit stop in a forgotten corner of the world. A colony of dirt-covered humans who would never understand the elegance of dragonkind. She whispered sharp words to Kael'th, telling him not to lower his head, not to show weakness before these simple folk. The people, however, did not see weakness. They saw courage. They saw a dragon that still lived, still breathed fire, and still carried a rider despite the pain etched in his movements. But Lysara's pride blinded her to this. She only saw pity in their gazes, and pity to her was worse than hatred. The colony leaders came forward, bowing slightly. Though they seemed uncertain whether they should bow to the rider or the dragon, Lysara gave them a dismissive nod, speaking in a tone as sharp as a blade. She declared that she required assistance not from the common villagers, but from someone skilled enough to repair the mechanical rig that had been strapped to Kael'th's wing. The rig had been designed by the dragonsmiths of her homeland, masters of forging weapons and armor for both human and beast. Yet their proud creation had failed, the gears locking and the hinges snapping under the strain of Kael'th's powerful muscles. The colony leaders exchanged nervous glances, for in their small settlement, they had no dragonsmiths, no great artificers, no scholars of ancient magic. What they had were practical workers, farmers, builders, and mechanics who patched wagons, repaired engines, and kept the colony's mining machines alive. They suggested one such person, a human mechanic named Marcus, who was known for his clever hands and patient methods. At the sound of this, Lysara's lips curled into a smile, not of gratitude, but of mockery. The idea that a simple mechanic, one who spent his life covered in grease and dust, could succeed where royal masters had failed, struck her as laughable. She glanced down at Kael'th, shaking her head. She muttered under her breath that it was humiliating even to consider. Still, she had no choice. Kael'th's injury was not healing, and every day that passed without flight was a dagger to both dragon and rider. So with clear reluctance, she agreed to let this mechanic inspect the dragon. Though she made certain everyone around her heard the disdain in her voice, she declared that if the human failed, as he surely would, the colony should be held accountable for wasting her time. Kael'th, sensing his rider's frustration, gave a low rumble. It was not a growl of anger, but something deeper, almost sorrowful. The dragon's pride had been wounded alongside his wing. He longed for the skies, for the feeling of clouds rushing past his scales. Yet now he was bound to the earth, mocked not only by others but by the shadow of what he once had been. The people watched the dragon settle near the edge of the square, his massive form curling as he tried to ease the pain in his wing. Children peeked from behind their parents, wide-eyed at the sight of a living legend. Some felt fear, others awe, but all of them felt something unforgettable, for most had never stood so close to a dragon. Lysara, however, noticed none of this. Her gaze was fixed on her surroundings with disinterest. She tapped her boots against Kael'th's scales, annoyed at the dust that clung to her armor. In her mind, this place was beneath her, and so were its people. Yet fate had brought her here, to this colony of humans, and she did not yet realize that her pride would soon be tested, and so the proud rider dismounted. her boot striking the ground with sharp clicks. The colony leaders bowed again, guiding her toward the workshop where Marcus waited. Lysara rolled her eyes at the thought of meeting him, already preparing the words she would use to remind this mechanic of his lowly place. She had no idea, as she marched forward with her head high, that this meeting would change everything, both for her and for Kelth. The dragon who longed to fly again, Marcus was a quiet man. He spent most of his days inside the workshop at the edge of the colony, fixing mining engines, repairing broken wagons, and building tools that others thought could not be repaired. His hands were always stained with oil, his clothes patched from years of work, but his eyes carried a calm steadiness. He was not one to boast about his skills. People trusted him because he worked carefully, and unlike many, he never rushed when something important was placed in his hands. When the leaders of the colony told him that a dragon rider had arrived with a wounded beast, Marcus had only raised his brows. He had seen many strange machines and broken things, but never a dragon. Still, he agreed to take a look. For him, repairing was not only a job, it was a challenge he welcomed. Outside, the townsfolk gathered as Lysara stood proudly beside Kelth. The dragon's wing brace was strapped tightly, a mess of twisted steel and cracked leather. The creature shifted uncomfortably, his claws scraping the ground as though he hated the weight of the broken device. Lysara, however, did not seem concerned with his pain. Instead, she was focused on the man who now walked toward her, wiping his hands on a rag. "So this is your mechanic?" Lysara said loudly, making sure her voice carried to those around her. Her tone was filled with scorn. She looked Marcus up and down, noticing his simple boots, the grease on his sleeves, and the quiet way he carried himself. To her, he was nothing more than a commoner who smelled of iron and smoke. "Yes, this is Marcus," one of the colony leaders answered. "He is the best with machines here." "The best?" Lysara repeated, and then she laughed, a sharp sound that made Kelth shift his head. "Your best is still just a human tinkerer. Do you truly expect me to believe that this workshop man can do what trained dragonsmiths could not?" "Do not make me laugh again." Marcus did not answer right away. He had learned long ago that words could be wasted on prideful people. Instead, he stepped closer to the dragon, moving slowly so as not to startle the beast. Kelth's great eye turned toward him, the ember-like glow watching him with curiosity. The dragon's breath came out hot and heavy, but Marcus did not flinch. He had worked beside roaring engines that belched steam hotter than fire. This was no different, at least to him. "Stay back," Lysara snapped. "Do not touch him without my command." Marcus paused, meeting her eyes. Then he gave a small nod and said gently, "I will not harm him. I only need to see how this brace was built, and why it is failing." His voice was calm, without anger, almost as if her insults had slipped past him without leaving a mark. But Lysara was not finished. She turned to the crowd, spreading her arms dramatically. "Look at this," she said. "They bring me a man who repairs wagons and shovels, and expect him to fix Kelth, my dragon. My family trusted the greatest artisans of the realm, men who forged armor for kings, and even they failed. Yet this colony dares to think a grease-covered human can succeed." Her words drew nervous laughter from a few of the villagers, though most stayed silent, ashamed at her cruelty. Marcus knelt beside the dragon, inspecting the broken rig. His hands traced the bent metal, the fractured gears, and the straps that had worn thin. He murmured quietly, almost to himself, noting how the design had ignored the natural movements of a dragon's wing. "Too rigid," he said softly. "They forced it into the shape of a weapon instead of letting it move as it must." Kelth gave a low rumble. Almost as if he understood, his tail shifted, brushing the ground near Marcus. Lysara noticed and narrowed her eyes for a moment. She thought her dragon was siding with this mechanic. The idea filled her with silent irritation. "Are you finished staring at it?" she mocked. "Or will you tell me you can solve this with the same tools you use to fix broken carts? Perhaps a hammer and a bucket of nails?" Her laughter rang out again, sharp and cold. But Marcus only rose to his feet, wiping his hands. His face remained calm. He did not argue, did not rise to the bait. He simply looked at Kelth and then at the broken device. In his mind, gears and joints began to take shape, ideas forming like sparks in the quiet. He knew this would not be easy, but he also knew something Lysara did not. Machines, no matter how complex, always had a reason when they failed. And once you understood that reason, you could find a way forward. Lysara turned away in disgust. whispering to Kelth that this was a waste of time. "We should never have come here," she muttered. "These people know nothing of dragons. They will embarrass themselves. And us too." But Kelth's eyes remained fixed on Marcus, and though the dragon could not speak, the silence between them felt heavy, as if the beast was quietly choosing where to place his trust. The colony folk shuffled uneasily, caught between respect for the proud rider and quiet faith in their mechanic. Marcus did not demand belief. He simply rolled up his sleeves, preparing to try, even as Lysara's mocking laughter echoed in the square. And thus the first meeting between the arrogant rider and the calm mechanic ended not with agreement, but with tension. One carried pride like a sword, sharp and blinding. The other carried patience like a shield, steady and unbroken. Only time would reveal which was stronger. The morning was cool, and mist clung to the edges of the colony when Marcus returned to the dragon. The crowd had grown smaller than the day before. Yet a handful of curious villagers still gathered near the square. Their eyes were filled with both excitement and fear, for how often did anyone see a dragon so close? Kelth lay stretched across the ground, his great wings folded tightly against his body. His scales shimmered in the pale light. Scarred but still beautiful, his breathing was steady, though every now and then a low rumble escaped his chest. Marcus approached quietly, carrying only a small tool bag. He did not walk with arrogance nor with hesitation. His steps were steady, measured as though he had walked toward dragons all his life. Lysara was already there, standing tall with her arms crossed. Her face showed impatience, and when she saw him, her lips curved in the familiar mocking smile she seemed to wear whenever she looked at him. "You return," she said sharply. "Do you plan to waste more of our time, mechanic? Or will you finally admit you cannot fix what you do not understand?" Marcus gave a small nod, not to her words, but to Kelth, as if greeting the dragon first. "I would like to examine the brace again," he said simply. His voice was calm, not defensive. Not weak, just steady. Lysara rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath, but Marcus ignored it. He crouched beside the dragon and began inspecting the straps, the twisted joints, the metal plates that no longer aligned. Kelth shifted, his massive head lowering slightly. His glowing eyes followed Marcus's hands, and for a moment, the mechanic lifted his palm and let it rest gently on the dragon's uninjured wing. The people watching tensed, unsure if the beast would snap or snarl, but Kelth remained still, the great rumbling breath deepening almost like a sigh. "Strange," Marcus murmured, mostly to himself. "They built this to be strong, but not to bend. It's like trying to force a bird's wing to move like a gate's hinge." His fingers traced the gears again, testing how they locked. "It was never made for flight, only for control," Lysara scoffed loudly. "Do not pretend you know more than the dragonsmiths. Their craft is beyond you, human." She raised her chin proudly, her voice sharp enough for the onlookers to hear. "You touch things you cannot comprehend, and you speak as if your grease-stained hands carry wisdom." But Marcus did not look up. He did not answer her insult with anger. Instead, he continued his work, steady as the tide. He adjusted a gear, loosened a strap, and then stood back to see how the dragon responded. Kelth moved slightly, testing the pressure on his injured wing. It was a small change, but the dragon's eye flickered. The faintest sign of relief, Marcus caught it. Though he said nothing, the villagers, however, noticed too. They whispered among themselves, some daring to smile. Lysara noticed as well, and her lips tightened for all her scorn. She could not deny that Kelth seemed calmer near this man. "You think your silence makes you strong," she said coldly. "But it only makes you foolish. A true craftsman defends his work, a true rider defends her honor. Yet you bow your head as if my words do not matter." Marcus finally glanced at her. His eyes were not angry, only steady. "My words won't mend your dragon's wing," he replied softly. "Only my work might. If you want talk, you can keep mocking. If you want flight, let me keep working." The statement was not harsh, yet it silenced the square. Even Lysara faltered for a heartbeat. She was not used to people refusing to rise to her bait. Pride was her weapon, but Marcus would not fight her with pride. He fought only with patience. Kelth shifted again, lowering his head until his snout was near Marcus. The mechanic stood calmly, letting the dragon's hot breath wash over him. For a long moment it looked as if the beast was testing him, weighing his spirit, and when Kelth gave the smallest nudge of his nose against Marcus's shoulder, a hush fell over the villagers. The dragon trusted him even if the rider did not. Lysara's jaw tightened. She turned away quickly so no one would see the storm in her eyes. She whispered to herself that it meant nothing, that her dragon was only curious. But deep inside, a seed of doubt began to grow. A seed she fought to crush. Marcus returned to his work without another word. His hands moved carefully, adjusting what little he could for now. He knew it would take more than small fixes to restore the dragon's flight. He needed time, materials, and the chance to build something new. But for the moment, his calm manner had done what Lysara's pride could not. It gave Kael'th a sliver of comfort. The villagers slowly began to drift away, whispering about what they had seen. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled with quiet hope. But all of them knew one thing. The human mechanic was not like others. He did not shout, he did not boast. He did not shrink, he simply worked, calm as stone. Steady as the earth beneath their feet, Lysara watched him in silence now. Her mocking words caught in her throat. She told herself she still despised him, that he was nothing more than a peasant touching what he could not possibly understand. Yet in the corner of her mind, a small, unwanted thought whispered, what if he was different? What if just once a human could succeed where her own kind had failed? And as Kael'th settled, resting his massive head close to the mechanic as though he had chosen his own ally, Lysara felt the sting of something she did not want to admit. For the first time, her pride felt fragile, and Marcus's calm silence was the hammer that cracked it. The days passed slowly, and Marcus spent every spare hour in his workshop. The colony had given him space and materials, though they were far from perfect. Most of what he had were scraps from mining machines, broken tools, and old alloys that had been left to rust. Yet Marcus worked with what he had. His hands moved carefully, shaping metal, hammering joints, and crafting pieces that might one day help Kael'th spread his wings again. The villagers sometimes came to watch through the open door. They whispered about him, wondering if it was even possible. Some doubted, some hoped, but Marcus never let their words distract him. He measured, melted, reforged, and shaped until slowly a new rig began to take form. Unlike the rigid, heavy brace from the dragonsmiths, Marcus's design was lighter, flexible, and built with the movements of a bird's wing in mind. He had studied the way Kael'th shifted, the way his muscles strained when he tried to stretch his broken wing, and he designed every hinge to bend as naturally as possible. Lysara, however, showed no patience. Each time she visited, her voice carried sharp remarks. "Still working on that pile of junk?" She would sneer. "Do not think I do not see it, Marcus. It will break the moment Kael'th takes to the air. You are wasting your time, and worse, you are wasting mine." Yet Marcus did not respond to her insults, he only nodded and kept working. His silence frustrated her more than anger ever could. Finally, the day came when Marcus declared he was ready to test the first version of the rig. The colony gathered once more, eager to see if the mechanic's efforts would bring any change. The device, though simple in appearance, carried the promise of something greater. Straps of strong leather wrapped around Kael'th's chest and shoulders. While the new joints glimmered with freshly polished steel, the dragon's wing looked heavier than before, yet somehow freer. Marcus worked with care as he fastened the final straps. His hands moved gently, murmuring low words of comfort to Kael'th. The dragon rumbled in response, lowering his head as though he understood. Lysara stood to the side, her arms folded, her eyes sharp. "Remember what I told you," she said coldly. "When this fails, you will prove to everyone what I already knew. Humans cannot do what dragonsmiths could not." Marcus did not argue. He stepped back once the rig was secure and gave Kael'th space to test it. For a moment the dragon hesitated, stretching his injured wings slowly. The joints creaked but held. The wing moved further than it had in months, and the crowd gasped. A spark of hope flickered in their eyes. Kael'th gave a low roar, lifting his body and spreading both wings wide. His muscles tensed, his tail lashed, and with a powerful push he leapt from the ground. Dust exploded beneath his claws, and for a brief moment Kael'th rose higher than anyone had seen since his injury. The villagers cheered, their voices rising with joy. Even Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile. But then, with a sickening snap, one of the joints twisted, the leather strap tore, and Kael'th stumbled mid-air. The dragon crashed back to the ground with a heavy thud, the earth shaking beneath him. He roared in pain and frustration, folding his injured wing tight against his body once more. The crowd fell silent, the cheer dying as quickly as it had risen. Lysara's laughter cut through the quiet like a knife. She clapped her hands slowly, mockingly, her voice filled with cruel triumph. "I told you," she said loudly, so all could hear. "I told you he would fail. A miner's mechanic is no match for the forges of the dragonsmiths. And now you see it, you see the truth I already knew." Marcus did not look at her. His gaze remained on Kael'th, checking to see if the dragon was badly hurt. He moved carefully, speaking softly until the great beast calmed. Kael'th's eyes burned with frustration, but there was no anger at Marcus, only a quiet, tired sorrow that weighed heavier than any chain. Lysara, however, was not finished. She stepped closer, her voice sharp and cold. "Do you see now, mechanic? Do you see how foolish it was to try? You should have left it to those who understand true craft. You shame yourself. And worse, you shame my dragon." Her words dripped with disdain. But Marcus did not rise to them. He stood, his face calm, and said only, "It was not enough, but it taught me something, and I will try again." His tone carried no anger, no defeat, only quiet determination. The villagers looked at him with surprise, for many would have given up under such humiliation. Yet Marcus's calm was unshaken. He collected the broken parts, studying the twisted metal and torn straps, already thinking of ways to improve. Lysara shook her head in disbelief, whispering bitterly, "Stubborn human," but Kael'th, tired though he was, lowered his head toward Marcus once more. His eyes glowed with the faintest spark, as though he trusted that this calm, quiet man would not stop until he found the answer. The villagers saw it too, and while Lysara continued her mocking, many of them began to believe that perhaps the mechanic's silence was stronger than her scorn. And so the first attempt ended not in triumph but in failure. Yet it was a failure that carried the seed of something greater. Marcus did not see it as the end, but as the beginning of understanding. The dragon's pain had shown him the flaws in his design, and his calm heart refused to let that lesson go to waste. Lysara's laughter still rang in the air, sharp and cruel, but beneath it there was a quieter sound, the steady rhythm of a man who would not give up, and the heavy breath of a dragon who had not yet lost hope. The air was heavy after Kael'th's fall. The dust from the crash still lingered in the colony square, and the villagers slowly drifted back to their homes, whispering to one another about what they had seen. Some spoke with disappointment, others with pity, and some with quiet hope that Marcus might still succeed. But the loudest voice, the one that cut through every whisper, was Lysara's mocking laughter. It echoed in the ears of the villagers long after she turned away. Marcus stayed behind with Kael'th. He moved carefully around the dragon, checking the creature's joints, his scales, and the injured wing. The metal brace lay broken beside them. Twisted and bent from the strain, it was clear the device had failed. But what Marcus saw was not just failure, it was a lesson. He crouched, his fingers brushing along the snapped leather straps, his mind already turning over the reasons why it hadn't worked. Lysara stood a few steps away, her arms crossed, her chin lifted. "Do you see it now?" she said coldly. "Your work is nothing more than a child's toy. Kael'th deserves better. My people gave him the best, and if even they failed, how could you think you would succeed?" Her words struck sharp, meant to wound, but Marcus did not raise his voice. He simply nodded once and said, "It failed, yes, but I know why." That answer infuriated her. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You speak as though you learned something. You speak as though this broken mess is a victory. Look at him, look at Kael'th. He is suffering because of your arrogance." Marcus turned to the dragon, who watched him with burning amber eyes. There was no hatred there, only trust. A trust Lysara refused to see. Marcus reached out, resting his hand gently on the dragon's great shoulder. "I will fix it," he said quietly. "I promise." Kael'th gave a deep rumble, not of anger but of calm. The sound vibrated through the ground and into Marcus's chest. It was as if the dragon understood that this man, unlike so many others, would not give up that night. Marcus sat in his workshop surrounded by broken parts. His hands moved across the pieces, fitting them together, taking them apart. Sketching designs on scraps of parchment, he thought about the way Kael'th's wing had moved, about how the rigid joints had snapped under pressure. The problem, he realized, was not in the strength of the material, but in the design itself. The dragon's wing was alive. Muscle and bone meant to flex and stretch. The brace he had made had been too stiff, forcing Kael'th's movements instead of working with them. "This needs to bend," Marcus murmured to himself, "not fight against him. It needs to move as he moves," his mind filled with ideas. He remembered the machines of the mines, the way gears shifted to absorb shock, the way pistons gave under pressure but returned stronger. Perhaps, he thought, he could borrow such ideas and give Kael'th something the dragonsmiths never considered. While he worked, Lysara paced outside the workshop. She told herself she was only there to keep watch, to ensure this foolish human did not waste more of her time, but in truth something deeper gnawed at her. She remembered Kael'th's eyes, the way the dragon had nudged Marcus gently even after the fall. It was almost as if Kael'th trusted him more than her. The thought burned her pride like fire. The next day, Lysara confronted Marcus again. "You are stubborn," she said. "Too stubborn for your own good. Do you think Kael'th will survive endless experiments? Do you think I will stand by while you break him piece by piece?" Marcus looked up from his work. His face was tired but steady. His hands were stained with grease, but his eyes held a quiet light. "I don't want to break him," he said softly. "I want to give him back what was taken. I can't promise when, and I can't promise it will be easy. But I will not stop trying." Lysara opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Instead, she turned sharply and walked away, her armor clinking with each step. Pride wrapped around her like a shield, but inside her heart doubt whispered louder each day. Kael'th, meanwhile, grew restless. The dragon stretched his wings whenever Marcus came close, testing the broken limb, groaning in pain yet showing no fear. The beast seemed to understand that each failure brought them closer to flight. And in those quiet moments, when no one else was near, Marcus would speak to him. "We'll get there," he would murmur. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But we'll get you back to the sky." The villagers began to notice the bond forming. They spoke less of failure, and more of the strange trust between the dragon and the mechanic. Some even brought Marcus supplies, leather scraps, metal rods, bolts that might help. Their faith grew slowly, built not from grand promises but from the calm determination of one man who refused to quit. But for Lysara, the setback was poison. Each time she saw her dragon look to Marcus, something inside her cracked. She told herself it was anger, that she despised this human for daring to step where nobles had failed. Yet in truth it was fear. Fear that she was no longer the center of Kael'th's loyalty. And so the setback did not end with broken metal. It ended with broken pride. Marcus saw failure as a teacher, but Lysara saw it as humiliation. Two paths diverged that day, one of patience and learning and one of bitterness and doubt. Only Kael'th seemed to know which path would lead them back to the skies, and his great eyes never left Marcus. The nights grew longer as Marcus worked. His workshop glowed with the soft orange light of lanterns, and the steady sound of hammering and grinding filled the silence of the colony. While others slept, Marcus bent over scraps of metal and worn-out tools, his hands moving with careful precision. He had failed once, but instead of giving up, he carried that failure like a map, guiding him toward what needed to change. On the workbench lay sketches that looked messy to most eyes but made perfect sense to him. He drew the curve of Kael'th's wings again and again, marking the joints, the muscles, the way the bones bent when the dragon stretched. He had watched the creature for hours, memorizing each movement. The smiths before him had built armor to restrain, but Marcus wanted to build something that could move as freely as Kael'th himself. The idea came to him when he remembered the colony's mining machines. They were heavy and strong, yet designed to bend and absorb shock when cutting through hard rock. Their pistons did not resist. They worked with the pressure, flexing and moving as needed. What if, Marcus thought, Kael'th's brace could be made the same way? What if instead of forcing his wing into one shape, it adapted to his movements? He began to shape lighter pieces of metal, thinner but stronger, mixing them with alloys salvaged from old mining tools. He built flexible joints that could rotate smoothly, and he lined the straps with softer leather so they would not bite into Kael'th's scales. The design looked strange, even fragile, but Marcus believed in it. He whispered to himself as he worked, "Not a cage, not a chain, something alive." The villagers noticed the glow from his workshop each night, and slowly they began to help. Someone brought him stronger leather from a trader's pack. Another brought steel rods that had been left unused. Even children gathered scraps for him, curious and eager to see the dragon fly again. Their quiet faith gave Marcus strength, though he never asked for it. Lysara watched all of this from a distance. Her pride kept her from stepping inside the workshop, but her eyes followed Marcus every time he walked past. She told herself she still despised him, that his stubbornness was foolish. Yet something in her heart twisted whenever she saw how tirelessly he worked. He did not boast, he did not complain, he simply poured himself into the task as if Kelth's wings were his own. One night, unable to stop herself, she stepped into the workshop. The air smelled of hot iron and oil. Marcus looked up briefly, sweat running down his brow, but he did not stop. His hands continued to adjust a small gear. Lysara frowned at the sight of the half-built brace. "This looks fragile," she said sharply. "Do you really think this thin metal will hold him? Dragons are not wagons, Marcus. They are power, they are fire. Do you believe your scraps can carry that weight?" Marcus set down the tool and wiped his hands. His voice was calm as always. "Strength is not only about being hard," he said. "Sometimes strength is knowing when to bend. If it fights Kelth, it will break again. If it moves with him, it will last." Lysara wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at him for a long moment, then turned sharply, her cloak swaying behind her as she left. Yet the echo of his words stayed in her mind. Days later, when the device was finally complete, Marcus asked for Kelth to be brought to the square. The villagers gathered once more, their voices filled with both excitement and fear. This was not the first time they had seen him try, and some worried it would end the same way. Lysara stood close to Kelth, her arms folded, her face unreadable. Marcus carried the new brace carefully, piece by piece. He worked slowly, fitting the leather straps across Kelth's chest, fastening the joints near the wing bones, adjusting the hinges until everything sat in place. His movements were steady, and Kelth allowed it. The dragon's great body still as a statue. His trust in the mechanic was clear to all who watched. When the final strap was pulled tight, Marcus stepped back, his heart pounded, but his face remained calm. "Try," he said softly. Looking into Kelth's eyes, the dragon rumbled. Spreading his wings slowly, the joints bent, not stiffly, but smoothly, following the natural curve of his muscles. A hush fell over the crowd as Kelth stretched his broken wing further than he had in months, and the brace held. Lysara's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she did not laugh, she simply stared, her proud eyes wide with something she refused to name: hope. The villagers gasped and whispered, some clapping their hands, others calling out in awe. Kelth gave a roar that shook the square, not of pain but of strength. His wings spread wide, the new device gleaming in the sunlight. The dragon's body trembled with the memory of flight. He shifted, preparing to leap. But Marcus raised a hand quickly. "Not yet," he said gently. One step at a time, the dragon stilled, lowering his wings. It was clear the brace had worked, at least for now. And though Lysara tried to hold her usual mask of pride, she could not stop her eyes from flicking to Marcus again and again. A human had done what her people could not, and though she hated to admit it, part of her heart whispered that this was only the beginning. That night, the colony was alive with talk of what they had seen. The villagers spoke of Marcus with respect, calling him not just a mechanic but a craftsman. They spoke of Kelth's roar, of the way the dragon had moved, and they believed more strongly than ever that flight was possible. For Marcus, however, it was not celebration that filled him but quiet resolve. This was only one step. The real test would come when Kelth leapt into the skies once more, and as he sat in his workshop that night, looking at the empty bench and the glowing forge, Marcus whispered to himself, "We're close now, Kelth. Closer than ever." Outside, the dragon lifted his head to the stars, his great chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths for the first time in a long while. The fire in his eyes burned bright again. The morning was bright and clear, the kind of morning that seemed to promise change. A soft breeze moved through the colony, carrying with it the smell of earth and fire from the forges. People gathered once more in the square, whispering with excitement. They had seen Kelth stretch his wings with the new brace. They had seen him roar with strength, but today was different. Today, Marcus was ready to test if the dragon could truly take to the skies again. Kelth stood tall in the center, his scales gleaming in the sunlight. The brace wrapped firmly around his chest and wing, shining with the polish Marcus had given it the night before. The dragon shifted his weight, restless, his great tail swaying back and forth like a pendulum. His eyes burned with anticipation. For too long he had been chained to the ground, and now he could feel the air calling to him again. Lysara stood at his side, her hand resting against his scales. She wore her usual armor, but her expression was different. The usual smirk of pride was gone, replaced by a look of tight control. Her heart beat quickly in her chest. She wanted to believe her dragon would rise, but a part of her feared what it would mean if he succeeded. If Marcus, a simple human mechanic, was the one who gave Kael'th back the skies. Marcus approached slowly, his tool bag slung over his shoulder, though he hoped he wouldn't need it. He inspected the straps one last time, checking each buckle, each joint. His hands moved with steady confidence, though his heart pounded faster than he let anyone see. When he stepped back, he looked at Kael'th and gave a small nod. "It's ready," he said softly. "The rest is up to you." The villagers fell silent as Kael'th spread his wings. The new brace bent smoothly with his movements, the joints gleaming as they shifted with the dragon's muscles. Dust rose from the ground as Kael'th crouched low, his claws digging into the earth. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the entire colony holding its breath. Then with a mighty push, Kael'th leapt into the air. The ground shook with the force of his takeoff. Dust exploded around him. The dragon's wings beat powerfully, once, twice, and for the first time in many months. He rose higher and higher, his body lifted smoothly, carried not by pain but by strength. The brace held, bending and flexing with each movement. The villagers gasped, then erupted into cheers. Their voices filled the air as they shouted in awe, children pointing and laughing with joy. Lysara's mouth fell open. She stared at her dragon, her Kael'th soaring once again. Her heart pounded with disbelief and something sharper, pride. But not pride in herself, pride in Kael'th, and shame that it had been a human who made it possible. She clutched the reins tightly as if grounding herself. Kael'th roared, the sound rolling across the valley like thunder. His wings carried him higher, circling above the colony. The sunlight glimmered off his scales, and he moved with a grace none had seen in far too long. The villagers cheered louder, waving their arms, some even cried, for they knew they were witnessing something greater than any ordinary day. Marcus stood at the edge of the square, his face calm though his chest swelled with quiet relief. He had done it, his design worked, the dragon was flying. Each beat of Kael'th's wings was proof that failure had not been the end, but the path to success. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the roaring dragon and the cheering villagers wash over him. After several powerful circles in the sky, Kael'th descended slowly, his wings folding as he landed in the square. The ground trembled under his weight, but this time there was no stumble. No collapse. He stood tall, his chest rising proudly, his eyes glowing with fire once more. He had reclaimed what had been taken from him, and he knew it. The crowd rushed forward, cheering and clapping. Some reached out to touch the dragon's scales, though they quickly pulled their hands back in respect. Others surrounded Marcus, praising him for what he had done, calling him a genius, a hero. Marcus only shook his head, smiling faintly. "It wasn't me alone," he said quietly. Though most could not hear him over the noise, it was him. He never gave up. Lysara approached slowly. Her face was pale, her steps uncertain. She wanted to speak, to say something sharp and cutting as she always did, but the words would not come. She looked at Marcus, at the calm man who had done what her proud people could not. Her lips parted, but only silence came out. Kael'th lowered his great head, nudging Marcus gently with his snout. The gesture was clear: trust, gratitude, perhaps even friendship. The villagers gasped again, for they understood what it meant when a dragon gave such respect. Marcus placed his hand against Kael'th's nose. Steady as ever, his eyes softened. "Welcome back," he whispered. Lysara turned away, hiding the storm of emotions in her eyes. She wanted to be happy, and she was. But pride clawed at her heart. She had mocked him, called him useless, treated him as dirt, and yet here he stood, the man who gave her dragon his wings again. Her chest ached with regret she could not voice. The colony celebrated long into the day. The sound of laughter and music filled the air. For them, this was more than just the return of a dragon to the skies. It was proof that even in the farthest corners of the world, hope could rise again. Marcus sat quietly near the workshop, away from the noise, watching Kael'th rest peacefully under the stars. He did not crave the praise. His satisfaction came from the sight of the dragon sleeping soundly, his wings whole once more. And as he leaned back against the wooden wall, he allowed himself a small smile. The hardest part was over, or so he thought. For though Kael'th had returned to the skies, there was still one thing left broken: the pride of a rider who could not yet admit her mistake. The celebration in the colony slowly faded as night fell. The villagers returned to their homes, their laughter and songs drifting away into the cool evening air. Only a few lanterns still glowed in the square where Keoth rested. His great body curled like a mountain of living flame. His breathing was calm now, deep and steady. His wings twitched from time to time as though he still dreamed of flying. Marcus sat nearby, leaning against the wall of his workshop. His face was tired, but his eyes carried a quiet peace. He had done what he promised. Keoth had flown again. It had not been easy, but he had never expected it to be. He looked at his hands, still stained with grease and dirt, and allowed himself the smallest of smiles. For him, the true reward was not the cheers of the villagers, but the sight of the dragon returning to the skies. Lysara stood in the shadows watching. Her armor caught the faint light of the lanterns, but her proud posture was gone. She had not spoken since Keoth's flight. Her heart was a storm of emotions she could not name. She felt pride in her dragon, joy at seeing him soar again, but above all, she felt the heavy weight of shame pressing against her chest. She remembered every cruel word she had thrown at Marcus, every laugh, every insult. Every time she had dismissed him as nothing more than a dirty mechanic. She remembered telling herself that humans were beneath her, that they could never do what dragonsmiths of her world had failed to do. And yet here she was, standing in a forgotten colony, watching her dragon fly again because of a man she had mocked. Her hand tightened around the reins she still carried. Though Keoth did not need them now, her dragon had chosen for himself. Keoth had lowered his head to Marcus, nudged him with trust, and looked at him with the kind of respect he had once reserved only for her. Lysara's pride cracked like broken glass at the memory. She wanted to hate Marcus still. She wanted to cling to her arrogance, to tell herself it was luck or chance, but deep inside she knew it was not luck. Marcus had worked for it night after night. With no thought of glory, he had poured himself into every gear, every strap, every joint of that brace, and when she had laughed at him, he had not answered with anger. He had answered with calm, with patience, with quiet strength that, more than his skill, was what had broken her. Lysara stepped closer, her boots clicking against the stones. Marcus looked up as she approached, but he did not rise. He only nodded once in greeting. His face gave nothing away. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something sharp, something to defend her pride, but the words died in her throat. Instead, what slipped out was softer, almost trembling. You did it? Marcus tilted his head slightly, then looked back at Keoth. No, he said quietly, we did it, he did it. I only helped. His words carried no boast, no triumph, only the same calm honesty she had come to know. Lysara's throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, to apologize, but the words would not form. Her pride was too heavy, too sharp, it chained her tongue. All she could do was lower her eyes, something she had never done before in front of a human. Marcus did not press her. He did not demand her gratitude or her apology. He simply returned to silence, letting the night stretch between them. That silence was harder for her to bear than any insult. It forced her to face herself, to see how small her pride had made her. Keoth stirred, lifting his massive head. His eyes glowed in the lantern light as he looked between them. Then slowly he nudged Lysara with his snout, almost as if urging her to see the truth. Her dragon's eyes were clear, filled with respect not only for her but for the human she had scorned. Lysara felt tears prick at her eyes, though she blinked them away before they could fall. She turned to Marcus, her voice barely more than a whisper. I was wrong. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Fragile and quiet, Marcus met her gaze. He said nothing, but the faintest smile touched his lips. It was enough. The colony slept peacefully that night. But Lysara did not. She lay awake beside her dragon, her thoughts turning over and over. She had lived her whole life believing in the greatness of her kind, believing humans were beneath her, and yet it had been a human who had restored what even her people could not. She realized then that strength was not just fire or power or pride. Sometimes strength was patience, kindness, and the quiet refusal to give up by morning. Lysara's pride had not vanished. It was too much a part of her. But something within her had shifted. She no longer looked at Marcus as a lesser being. She looked at him as something she had never expected, a man worthy of respect. She could not yet speak the apology that burned on her tongue, but when Marcus passed her in the square that day, she bowed her head ever so slightly. It was a small gesture, so small most would not notice. But Marcus noticed, and Keoth noticed. The dragon's great eye glimmered with something like approval, for though Lysara still carried her pride, the regret in her eyes spoke louder than words. And so the story did not end with a battle, nor with a grand speech. It ended with a dragon who had regained the sky, a human who had proven his worth, and a rider who learned the hardest lesson of all, that pride can blind, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the hands of those we least expect.